the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 20, the 2023 African Cup. This episode is part 2 of the Players of Ivory Coast, the final selection. Here we go. Hello, we are back for part 2 of our mediacast on the Players of the 2023 African Cup. The final roster is released and we're looking at Ivory Coast's selections. In part 1, we compiled a list of players and their likelihood of reaching the final squad. That was based mostly on their participation over the past 2 years, but we did consider a couple of other factors as well. Today, we review that list now that the final squads have been announced. And we're going to do what we said we'd do at the end of part 1, which is to point out any surprises, any notable non-selections or surprise inclusions, and new players. And we are also going to cover any injuries. So we'll do those things as we go through the list. Again, we also released a spotlight review. That was a not so serious prediction of the starters, and we released that as a short version. So we'll review that list at the end here to see if anything has changed. So let's jump right in. We have a little bit of team information to talk about. The teams were allowed to bring 27 players to the Cup. And that decision was actually made in mid-December. They raised it from 23 to 27. Also, Ivory Coast produced a 54-man preliminary squad, so they had to cut that in half to create the final squad. They had to cut 27 players, and that is what we are left with here. So we will point out some of those players. Actually, about 10 of them were players that hadn't appeared on our list and mostly have not played for the national team before. So we won't get into those. But the ones who were on the list, we will tell you if they made the preliminary squad. Let's look at the games. Actually, we did the part 1 after their 2 World Cup qualifiers in November. So we had kind of look at their players in those games. They had one pre-tournament friendly here, and that was against Sierra Leone. And what we found there is actually the defense and midfield looked like what they might field as their selection for the first game. Or their starters. The upper end of the field, the attacking end of the field, not so. It looked more experimental, but we will kind of tell you what that looked like. Okay, that's it for the team information, and we move to the main part, the candidates, to see who made it and who didn't. Let's begin with the manager. I think I thought the manager might not make it, actually. Sorry, I'm just finding my spot on the list here. So the manager will remove Patrice Baumel. We had talked about him as the outgoing manager. Jean-Louis Gasset took over in April 2022, and we're not going to give biographical information here, but if you do want to review that, we recommend part 1. We gave biographical information on some of the players. Jean-Louis Gasset, we are considering a definite candidate, because I just want to make sure actually that he is, yes, he is not dismissed before the tournament, so we'll consider him as having been selected effectively. Okay, let's move on to the goalkeepers, and we had a definite candidate in newcomer Yaya Fofana, stepped right into the starting position there. We had a likely candidate in Badra Ali Sangar, and a possible, also likely Charles Foley Ayayi. And I think we put on our list the possible but unlikely Ira Eliezer Tape. So let's see what happened there. well, all three of the main candidates selected. So Yaya Fofana, Badra Ali Sanger, and Charles Foley Ayayi, all selected. Tape made the preliminary squad, but not the final cut there. And that is all we have to talk about for goalkeepers. So let's move on to defenders and central defenders. So we had a definite candidate, Evan Ndika, and two possible candidates in Ousmane Diomande and Willy Bolly. And then we had four possible candidates, Odilon Kusunu, Abakar Silla, Eric Bailly, and Simon Daly there. And we have a couple of players who were seemingly off the squad. I'll talk about them when we get there. Excuse me, I had to cough there. Okay, let's go back to the top of the list. And Evan Ndika was selected for the cup. Ousmane Diomande, the likely candidate, and Willy Bolly, both selected. Possible candidates, our first one, Odilon Kusunu, was selected for the squad. Abakar Silla not even selected for that huge preliminary squad. But Eric Bailly and Simon Daly, they did make the preliminary squad, but not the final cut. We had them as possible candidates for really for that very reason. And then two players who were off the squad, seemingly off the squad, Emmanuel Agbadu. We didn't put him on the list because he missed the last 5 matches and had only played sparingly there. And Sinali Diomande last appeared for the team in November 2022, so we hadn't put him on the list either. Both of those selected for the preliminary squad. I guess I'll put them on the list here just so you can see the names. Emmanuel Agbadu and Sinali Diomande. And yeah, we had put Wilfred Cannon on the list with a slim chance of coming back, but not selected for the preliminary squad. Even Wilfred Cannon last played in June 2020. So there's our central defense. 4 candidates, Evan Ndika, Ousmane Diomande, Willy Bolly, and Odilon Kusunu. So we'll come back at the end to see a little bit about starters, but here we just focused on whether they made the squad or not. Let's look to left backs, and we had a definite candidate in Ghislaine Conan, and no likely candidates, but 2 possible candidates, Hussein Kamara, and Suleiman Doumbia. And we for a lot of these categories did have possible but unlikely or seemingly off the squad candidates, but we didn't put them on the list. And in part 1, and we won't put them on the list here unless they at least made the preliminary squad. So Conan Ghislaine selected for the squad. Hassan Kamara selected only for the preliminary squad, didn't make the final cut, and Suleiman Doumbia not even making the preliminary squad there. And so just 1 left back and 4 central midfielders, so a bit short in both of those departments, so I wonder where they're going to make it up here. Next we have right backs. This is a standard amount, 2 of them making it. The first one, I kind of gave it away, didn't I? Okay, well, we had 2 likely candidates, Serge Aurier and Wilfried Singo, and then we had 1 possible candidate in Kouassi Atohula. And Serge Aurier not only made the squad, but is captain of the squad there. And the other likely candidate, Wilfried Singo, also selected for the final squad. Kouassi Atahulo not even selected for the preliminary squad there. All right, moving on to defensive midfielders. Moving on to the midfield and defensive midfielders specifically, Idrissa Doumbia was our only candidate as a defensive midfielder, and he was at the possible level, but he was selected for the squad, Idrissa Doumbia. And yes, on to central midfield, we actually have a new candidate. That's what I was hesitating there about, but we'll introduce him when the time comes. We had a likely candidate in central midfield, Jean-Michel Seri, actually coded as a central attacking midfielder, but we noted that he had played central midfield more over the past 2 years. We had a possible candidate, Seko Fofana. So, wow, a bit thin here too. Jean-Michel Seri was selected, as was Seko Fofana. And it is a bit thin. They added the one player, newcomer Jean-Thierry Lazaire, new to the squad. So I'll just introduce him quickly. He has been with the team actually since 2022. November 2022, he appeared twice for Ivory Coast, once on the bench and once as a substitute, and then was not heard from again for more than a year until he was recalled or named to the 54-man preliminary squad. And even at that point, it's surprised that he was selected for the final squad. So Jean-Thierry Lazaire, as I say, I think bolstering the numbers in the central midfield. He plays for Union Saint-Gilloise in Belgium, and an interesting story is an Ivory Coast player playing through the Aspire Academy in Qatar. And I have seen players other than Qatari, so African players come through there. And the way they usually come through is through Eupen in Belgium. And that's exactly what Lazaire did, was with Eupen in Belgium for 4 years, and moved up to Union Saint-Gilloise, and probably on out to Europe is the usual pattern. Anyway, by the way, Jean-Thierry Lazaire is sometimes listed as Lazaire Amani, so you may see him under that name. Okay, I've talked too much about him. Let's move on to the central, or to the left and right midfield. Fewer and fewer players are coded this way, but actually we do have 2 players coded as right midfielders, and you can think of them as central midfielders because that's where they play. We had 2 definite candidates actually, Ibrahim Sangaré and Frank Kessie, and both of them were selected for the squad. No surprise there. So actually that does bolster the midfield, the central midfield there. Moving on upfield to the left upper quadrant of the field. So left wingers, left attacking midfielders, even left forward, depending on the formation, is what this is. And we had a definite candidate in Max Allen Gradel. I see he's being listed as Max Gradel recently. We also had 2 likely candidates, Christian Kouame and Simon Adingra, and then 3 possible candidates, Maxwell Cornet, Jonathan Bamba, and Jean-Evrant Kouassi. All right, well, this is obviously where the resources are being spent, because 4 of them are selected for the squad. First, Max Allen Gradel, or Max Gradel, is selected. Likely candidate Christian Kouate and Simon Adingra was selected. I'll just pause though to make a note on Simon Adingra. On my main resource for injuries, he is on that list with a hamstring injury, and it says an unknown return date. I don't know when he was first put on that list. But anyway, he has not been replaced on the squad. But if that turns out to be true, we may see him replaced on the squad, Simon Adingra, which would be a shame. And among the possible candidates, Cornet Maxwell selected for the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. Jonathan Bamba selected for both, so we'll see him at the Cup. and Jean-Evren Kouassi, also just the preliminary squad. So we have 4 candidates there: Gradel, Kouame, Adingra, and Bamba. Wow, what a powerful punch Ivory Coast has. Okay, let's move over to the right wing, and we had only as likely as a possible candidate here, no definite, no likely, and that was Wilfried Zaha. And then we had I had another possible candidate here, Amad Diallo. I'm not sure whether I missed him in the first go around, but Amad Diallo, I'll come back to him. And then we had seemingly off the squad, Nicolas Pepe. So here's the biggest surprise in an otherwise fairly unsurprising Ivory Coast selection. Wilfried Zaha was not selected. That's actually not the surprise. We only had him as a possible candidate based on his participation. Amad Diallo, the player I had forgotten to put on, it seems, also a preliminary squad like Wilfried Zaha. But the player selected here, and this is the surprise, is Nicolas Pepe. So he had last appeared for the team in November 2022. I think we kind of made note of his club kind of decline in club, moving from Arsenal in England, where he hadn't done that well, loaned out to Nice in France, and then over to Trabzonspor in Turkey. So Nicolas Pepe, glad to see him back, really, but a surprise because I didn't expect it to happen. Okay, let's move on to the forwards, and we had again, no definite, no likely, but 3 possible candidates: Hamed Traore, Jeremy Boga, and Jean-Philippe Gbamin. And Hamed Traore was selected just for the preliminary squad, as was Jean-Philippe Gbamin. But Jeremy Boga was the one who was selected for the final squad among those 3. So again, not a surprise, all possible candidates, and usually we find about a third to a half of the possible candidates get selected. On to forwards, and we had 2 likely candidates, Sebastian Haller and Jean-Philippe Crasso. And then we had 2 possible candidates, Karim Konate and Umar Diakite. So all of those 4 were selected, Sebastian Haller and Jean-Philippe Crasso, the 2 likely ones, and then the 2 possible ones, Karim Konate and Umar Diakite. And that is it. That is your Ivory Coast squad. Just 1 new candidate, and really, apart from Nicolas Pepe, only 1 real surprise there. The others tended to be definite, likely, or at least possible. So things went fairly well as expected. I should also say, just like Adingra there, Sebastian Haller also was on that injured list that I saw with an ankle injury, also has not been replaced on the squad. So I'll have to, I'll be able to judge how reliable that site is by this, because they're reporting something and we haven't seen any other evidence of it, I guess. Anyway, so we may see a couple of late replacements there, but otherwise they remain on the squad. And let's move on to the last part, which we did again as a short. The reason I did that was to kind of, I wanted something to put on TikTok. And so I decided to do the spotlight review for a bit of fun. But it is a bit of fun, and let's go over it and see if that last game has caused any changes. Okay, so we had, I'm just going to actually copy my list and put it in a more convenient place to look at. Really, we're not making any changes here, I don't think. We have Yaya Fofana. He did play the friendly, and we were quite confident he'd be the starter, and we still are. For central defence, we had Evan Ndika as a definite starter, and two players who we thought were potential starters, Usman Diamande and Willie Bolly. In the friendly, Ndika and Diamande were the starters. So maybe we give a slight nod towards Diamande over Willie Bolly there. But we do think actually we'll see both of them starting in the tournament. Gisling Conan, the left back, he did start the recent friendly, and so that gives us confidence. And we were already quite confident we had him in a green highlight. Suggesting that we were quite confident. At the right back position, we had Serge Aurier and Wilfred Singo. We felt that Wilfred Singo was kind of making strides towards a starting position there. Of course, he's got to overcome Serge Aurier, which is no mean feat. But we did have them both in blue, thinking that it would be one or the other, or else a rotation of both of them. In the friendly, it was Singo, so his challenge to become a starter continues there. Central midfielders, we were quite confident that both of the players that are coded as right midfielders, Ibrahim Sangaré and Frank Kessie, would be the starters. And they were in the friendly, but it was a 4-3-3. So Saka Fofana also got a start there. But we remain confident that the main starters are Sangaré and Kessie. Now it starts to get a bit fuzzy because even in the original podcast, we were quite critical that they haven't nailed down any of these positions and maybe have too many candidates that they're trying to please. Well, they did get rid of some of those candidates through the selection, but there's no greater clarity on the left wing. So we suggested perhaps Christian Kouame or Simon Adingra, but we weren't really confident that it would be any of them because players have been coming in and out, and that's exactly what happened. This time it was the forward Bamba that started as the left attacking midfielder. So we remain confused about that position. On the right, it's pretty much the same thing. We didn't even venture to name a candidate on the right because so many players have come in and out. One of them might have been Crasso, but excuse me a sec. But he didn't play more than a couple of games if he did show up at all. Anyway, he was the one in the friendly, so it continues to be a bit of a shuffle to deck there. And then we still are confident that Sebastian Haller is going to be the forward, but perhaps they were experimenting by using Jonathan Boga there. We wouldn't have expected that. But again, Adingra and Haller not selected, so maybe that does add some weight to the suggestion that they are injured. Anyway, hang on a sec. That brings us to the end of the mediacast. We would like to thank Pixabay and Alexei Ivanov of Mappa Music for the wonderful background music accompanying this mediacast.